And what I want to talk to you today is a question that I get asked so often by people just starting out with acrylic paints. Is the question that everybody wants to know is, how do I get a thin line? How can I get, if I were to zoom in on this right like this, how can I get these tiny thin lines? How do I get that? Because they'll say, my brush just won't do it. Well, first off, we're going to talk about brushes. We're going to talk about canvas, and we're going to talk about paint, because all of that makes a difference. For instance, what this particular painting was created on, and let me zoom it back out, was linen canvas. All right, this was linen canvas, and I've written the title on the back and some of the colors I'm using because I keep that in a class. But this is linen. Now you're going, okay, so Ginger, what's linen? Well, linen is a very tight woven canvas. You can usually tell because it's brown. The back of the canvas is brown. So as opposed to, say, this canvas, which is cotton, right, here's a canvas, another little painting, and I'll turn it over. You see it's white on the back. Most of the canvas that you'll see in the art store is going to be white. It's some form of white cotton duck that's been gessoed. But then there's also thread count, just like your sheets. When you go to buy sheets at, say, an inexpensive store, maybe the thread count's 300, and then you talk about Egyptian cotton, and you can get up to some pretty high thread count. The higher the thread count, the tighter the weave. The tighter the weave, the smoother the surface. Because basically what you're really talking about is your best chance of getting a very tiny line is having a very smooth surface. All right? Now you've got a couple of choices. So first off, know the surface you're painting on. For instance, here's a canvas. It's called Heavy Cotton Canvas. It's studio. It's by Alt Alternatives. And if you turn it over and you read what they said on the back, they said, our heavy grade canvas for heavy paint and mixed media. Application, palette knife, and so forth. All right, well, you can use a pretty rough canvas if you're going to do something like that with a palette knife. You know, that's really great. For instance, here's a painting that was done mostly, maybe you're familiar with it, you guys, this poppy painting, mostly with a palette knife. And so if the back of the if it's rougher, that's okay. However, you can make a choice on the canvases you use. And I've generally, for my online classes, I paint fairly small pictures. You can see this. I don't paint them this is like 6 by 8, and I love these little tablets. I have a choice between the Centurion, which is made by Creative Mark. It's one of Jerry's Artorama's brands, and it's got 10 sheets in it of linen canvas. So if you turn it over, you can see the brown on the back, and that's really very nice. A picture I might have done with that would be this little Van Gogh chair. And let me just move all this stuff out of the way so the camera can catch the color on this. All right, I don't want to get it too dark. Let me hit an autofocus on here and see if I can't lighten that up a bit. Okay, so anyway, so that's this chair now, and you see it's brown on the back. But you know, most of the time I paint, even with something like this one, it is a light cotton canvas. It's the light color. So, well, why wouldn't you use linen all the time? Well, for one thing, linen's a lot more money. That would be a start. It's usually a lot more. And for instance, here's the other tablet we use. This is 100% acid-free primed cotton canvas. This isn't paper. This is actual canvas in a sheet. And when you're stretching your own canvases, for instance, on larger paintings, if you're buying rolls of it, you're looking at thread count, surface, and so forth. So those are all things that attribute to whether or not you get a thin line. I just want to tell you that. Then the other thing is your paint. The other thing, well, we're all using acrylic paint. Well, yeah, there's acrylic paint and there's acrylic paint. So here's a piece of linen canvas, and I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about. Here's two types of Matisse paint. This one is called Flow, and it's a burnt umber, and I'm just going to, you shake it up a little bit. Shake these flow ones up. You don't with the heavy structure, but you do with the flows. And be very careful when you open the lid to just have it upright like this, and then very gently just pour out a little bit, because some of these are more liquid than others. All right, so that is a more liquidy type paint, and you're going to have a much better shot at getting a thin line with this canvas, or rather with this particular paint, than you would with the structure, Matisse structure. Same color, burnt umber. So I just want you to see the difference in the two paints. I'm going to put them out here like this, and you see how when I lift up, how the little there's a little peak there. Let me just zoom in. I don't think you can see that. Let me just zoom in. I'm just going to really pull this plate down. I'm going to tilt it. I don't know. I can't see it. But trust me, there's a little peak here. This one wants to go flat. That's your first clue. Now your next thing is, suppose you just don't have that that nice flow paint, which I like to buy. I don't have all my paints in that, but I like browns and whites, certain colors I want in flow. Things I know I'm going to want thin lines with, I make sure I have a tube of the flow. This is just really, really nice. So the other thing is, get a fine mist water sprayer. And one thing you can do is you can put a little tiny bit of water right on your palette. And then when you're starting out with your brush, think about your brush. If you look at this brush like this, do you see how it's all sort of frayed like that? What's going to happen with that is if you put, you're not going to get a thin line with that brush. It's a tiny brush, but it's all frayed like that. See that? You're not going to get a thin line with it. But if you're not quite ready to chunk it out yet, throw it away. Just put it in water like this. Now here's the trick. Oh gosh, she's going to tell us a trick. Yeah, here's the trick part. Then pull it and twist it. Pull it and twist it. And that's, make sure it's to a point. And I'm just going to show you. Then take a little tiny tip of water on the brush, a little tiny bit of paint, and roll off the excess paint. Roll it off the tip. Now here's the trick. The harder you push on a brush, the fatter the line. But if you're talking about just the tip, you can do a very, very tiny line like this. Very little pressure. And I like to kind of pull it toward me like that. So if I were to come over here and put this on this linen canvas, for instance, let's just do that. See, I can get a very thin line. Now, please notice that my hand is pulling. My arm, my wrist isn't doing this. I've locked my hand here, and now my arm is pulling back. You see that? So that allows me to keep the pressure, the same amount of pressure, on the line. So one of the things you can do is just as a warm-up, people don't just start playing the piano, they play scales. Consider getting to know your brushes. Now that was the heavy structure paint with a little tiny bit of water on the plate, so we made it sort of liquidy, all right? Now here's the flow. Let me just show you the difference. Now look, I'm going to roll the brush, and one thing I like to do is I like to pull it to a point every time and twist it every time I'm going to use it. Now, do not dive the brush into the paint like a swimming pool. Put it just on the tip, the first 30% of the brush. All right, now here we go. Now, quite frankly, the flow it's a little easier. It is a little easier, all right? So that would be how you might use a brush like this. You see, here we go, pulling it down. When you pull up, when you push up, there is a tendency, you have to just lighten the pressure. I personally don't like to go this way. I find the brush kind of comes apart. It's just not as effective. Now my brushes come up, when I say come apart, this was kind of an old brush that I'm still trying to show you how you can still make a thin line with it. And you see it's sort of split there now. So we'll put that in water, and let's talk about a different brush. Okay, so that's one way to make a thin line, and so you'll notice that I've got quite a few brushes that are just sort of split like this. They don't last, because what happens is when you use brushes on a rough surface, unlike rough canvas surface, here's another one, a little bit thicker. This is like a number 2 brush. They all have little numbers on them, and the smaller they get, like zeros, they're tinier. The problem with that is that no two brush manufacturers have the same number system, so it's not all that helpful. Now, the fatter the line, it's going to be because you pushed harder, but if you let up the pressure, you can make a very, very thin line. See that? You can make a very, very thin line. So I'm going to push harder here, then let up the pressure. And even this wider brush, I can make a thin line on, okay? I just really want you to understand, a lot of it is you. Yeah, it's nice if you have linen canvas, and, if you bought a canvas that wasn't linen, didn't have the brown on the back, because linen's more expensive, take some sandpaper and lightly sand it with some light sandpaper, and that will sort of smooth it out. Some people like to, put a couple extra coats of gesso. What you're trying to do is fill in the cracks and, those little crevices and cracks in the weave to make it smoother. For instance, you know, really a gessoed board, if you wanted something really smooth, it would be board. Now here's a brush like this. This is called a Bright. It's a number 4 by Silver, and it's called a Ruby Satin Silver. And you wouldn't think you could get a thin line with a brush like this, because obviously when you paint it, what do you get? You get this, right? That's what you get with the flat of the brush. And this is I'm in the flow thing right like that. Now, however, this is this pinching business I'm talking about. I'm going to pinch the brush like this and squeeze it and make a knife blade, because this brush doesn't just work like this. It also works as a vertical. Then, again, you don't dive into the middle. I'm just going to take a little bit on the ends like that, and then I'm going to hold the brush straight up in the air vertically, and then I'm going to come down here like this and then make a thin line. See? Make a thin line, and just like that. And you're either painting on the whole surface, or maybe you're only painting on the last few bristles. So every time you do it, squeeze it and pinch it. That's the trick. Every time you do it, squeeze it and pinch it. Let's just do it again. If I push hard, it goes fatter, and then I can just lift up the pressure, and then the brush is vertical. If it isn't doing it, I have to repinch it. That's the secret. So okay, so I'm going to do that, and there. Now I'm getting it very thin, because I'm really almost like dragging your toe. I'm doing it on the last few bristles. Now what happens to a brush like this, though, is they wear out. So here's one that's the same brush, but a little bit frayed here. You see that? You see it's a little splayed out. You're not going to get this brush to a point anymore. It's worn out. The bristles have worn out. Let me just get real close so you can see it. The bristles, what can I put this against so you can really see it? I'm going to put it like this. The bristles, can you see it? They flayed out here. That brush is worn out. It's still okay for doing this junk, but it's no longer going to do a straight, thin line. So then you're talking about, well, let's try a different brush. This one's also made by Silver, and it's just called a Bright, Silver Bright 1902. Bristolin or something. So I'm going to, same idea. Now, I haven't pinched it to a point. I want you to see what I get. Let me just make sure I have some paint on the brush. Like that. I haven't pinched it to a point. Now, I'm not getting a thin line. See that? So you're thinking, well, it must be me. Well, yeah, it is, because you've got to remember to pinch it, wet it, and pinch it. And then see. Now, if it won't pinch to a point, if it won't go flat, then you're never going to get a thin line with it. You know, this one will probably do it. Look at there. See? See, I can get a thin line with this, but this one's starting to wear out. And, you know, how long does it last? It just depends. If you leave these sitting in water, for instance, if you leave your brushes sitting in water, or you leave paint on them and they dry and you have to use a harsh chemical cleaner. A nice brush to consider for thin and thick lines is one that's at an angle. This is by Creative Mark. It's at an angle. But again, wet it, because I want a thin line now. I'm going to pinch it to a point. Just want you guys to get the sense of how this is going. I'm going to pinch it to a point. This one will really go flat for me, all right? You get a nice knife edge because it's still pretty new. I'm going to let me just bring this plate over here. I'm going to put paint on both sides like that. Now, here's the trick. Start with the point away from you and just come on down. And see, if I push hard, it's fatter, and if I lift up, it's thinner. See that? And again, it's starting to splay right here. These work really well when they're new, and when they're not new, you don't get this nice chiseled edge, and that's what you're looking for. All right, so let's just see if I can do it again here. There you go. See, I'm just painting with some of these bristles. And if the point's down, then you go, always, if you're going up, the point faces down, all right? So again, this brush is sort of splitting. And people will say, well, why don't you throw that away? Well, look, it makes this. That's kind of nice. So maybe I'd want some grass, and this brush is kind of wrecked for what I would normally have bought it for, but it still does this. Kind of what, you know, so part of the thing with artists is most of us won't get rid of a brush because we usually find it'll do something. Maybe not what we originally intended for it, but it'll do something. Now, so that's sort of the lesson in the brushes. You can get some smaller bright brushes. Those are the ones that are sort of squared off. And again, it's the same kind of deal. If you know, the harder you push, the fatter the line if you let the pressure up and you kind of hold it vertically. Now, again, when you're talking about thin lines, a lot of it depends on the size of your canvas. If you were painting on a very large canvas, say like a 30 by 40, a line like this might appear pretty thin. You see what I'm saying? On this canvas, it looks pretty fat, but on a bigger canvas, it's all relative to the size of the canvas and what you're painting. So you've got to consider that too. So that would be one way when we're talking about how to get a thin line with your brushes. So to review now, we're going to talk about whether you use linen canvas, whether you're going to use a linen canvas, whether you're going to use a a cotton canvas. I can just, here's one that's just regular cotton. This is the same stuff that they make sailcloth out of for boats, but they, again, there's different weaves. It's how tight the weave is, okay? And for instance, palette knife pictures, you don't need a particularly smooth canvas, all right? But for instance, just to show you in sort of contrast, say this canvas right here, again, I can still get a thin line on it. I really can. I can still get it. But let's just suppose I did a fat line and I didn't want it. I just thought it was too fat. So the other way to get a thin line is you can sort of cheat. And what I mean by cheat is you just erase the part you don't want. So it generally works, it's more effective if you've already got some paint on the canvas, but I'll show you here. Clean brush, start in the clean area, start wiggling back and forth and sneak up on what you just painted while it's still wet and pick up a little bit of paint. You see that? Then rinse the brush, wipe it off on a towel like this, wipe it off, pinch it again, start in the dry clean area, start wiggling like an eraser and creep right up on that. There, you see? So there's a couple of ways. So if you end up with a line you don't like and it's still wet, you can start on a dry area, start wiggling it, and then erase it. But again, that would have to be a fairly stiff brush. These are just so, there's so many variables. Now here's a brush like this. This is, a lot of times people like these. They're very long. They're originally designed for watercolors, for tree limbs, stuff like that. And when you put them to a point and you wet them, see, they're very long like this. Now this won't take heavy paint, but it will take more of the flow. And again, you can do very thin lines with this, all right? You see that? You can do very thin lines with this brush. But I'm a big fan of always pinching it and pulling it to a point. Let it, pinch it, pull it to a point, and then load. All right, so that's the instruction on how to do thin lines. We're going to talk about whether you did a linen canvas, whether you did a regular cotton duck canvas. What's the brand of the canvas? Was it designed? Was this canvas designed mainly for more impasto techniques? Portrait canvas, even if it isn't linen, is going to be very smooth. Read the back. If there's any information on the back of your canvas before you buy it, read it. And then consider the size you're making and take care of your brushes. And these little tiny ones, I have to promise you, they wear out. Just know your brushes wear out. You suddenly didn't lose your artistic ability to make a tiny line, but they do wear out. So now that you know that, you're set. And I want to thank you for watching. And if you think these tips are terrific, I've got more tips on our YouTube channel, Ginger Cook Live, and invite you to come to the Ginger Cook Gallery page and see some of the other classes that we have that we offer. And I do a weekly lesson that is really fun, really fun to do, and it's live over the internet, though you can watch the recording. So thanks very much for watching. Let me put this little picture back so you can kind of see what we're talking about. Now you kind of understand how we did these thin lines. I'm going to zoom back out on the little picture like this. There we go. That's it. See, now you get an idea how to do some very, very thin lines. And of course, the bigger the picture, the less thin the line has to be perceived as tiny and thin. So the smaller. Oh, one last thing I forgot to tell you. Oh, she always does this. You ever notice this about me? I'm all set and I'm going one last thing. It's always one last thing. Can't believe I spent 20 minutes telling you all this. It's one last thing. And the last thing is there's such a thing as permanent marker pens. And so what I would tell you is that Sharpie makes some different, they make paint pens, and like this is a Sharpie permanent marker pen, and you can use it with acrylic. So if you really needed a thin line, and some of the pens actually have like that. See, look at this. If you really needed a thin line, some of these pens are really, you can do really thin lines with it. And what's nice is once the ink's had a moment to dry, water won't lift it up. So that's your other trick, is to do something really thin. And there's one more thing I could tell you. Oh, what is it? Oh yeah, oh yeah. So all else has failed and you're still not happy with the thin line stuff, okay? All else has failed and you feel like you're not getting a thin line, all right? So what I want you to consider doing is use a gloss varnish or even a matte varnish, it doesn't really matter, and varnish the picture, part of the picture where you need the thin line, and that will start filling in all these little crevices in the canvas. And when that dries, it will be much like painting on glass. Your brush will go over it much more smoothly. So that's the last trick. And you can, people don't realize it. Well, with these varnishes by Liquitex and the different ones for acrylic varnish, not the spray ones, these are the brush-on varnishes. The advantage to these is that you can just keep painting over them. This isn't you can just keep painting. And sometimes you'll see something called, a varnish meat, and here's a matte varnish, satin finish. It doesn't really matter if it's matte or gloss. You can keep painting over these after they're dry, and then just keep building up your painting. So if all else fails and you feel like you're not getting it, go ahead and try that. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this fabulous new information on how to do thin lines. If you like this, consider subscribing to my channel if you happen to be seeing this up on YouTube. Thank you.